So let's keep an eye on that. In the meantime, I'll bring in some MPs. As the government tabled legislation yesterday to beef up powers for Canada's spy agency, they also signaled that more security measures are on the way. Should there be greater powers to track and detain suspects? And can we strike that right balance between security and personal freedoms? In the foyer, Erin O'Toole, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade. Paul Dewar is the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic. And Wayne Easter is the Liberal public safety critic. Just before we get started on the legislation, you heard both John Baird and John Kerry call the killing of at the War Memorial an act of terror. Let me just quickly go down the line. Mr. O'Toole, would you consider that a terrorist act?
Absolutely, Evan. When you look at the targets chosen, and I'm sure we'll know more about his motivations and his background and potentially some mental health issues, who knows, but the targets picked, a soldier at our National War Memorial and our Parliament, indicate a strike against our values and a strike really against our institutions. And in a week when another attack was done against the Canadian Forces, so whether it motivated the second one, we're not sure, but they're clearly targeting our institutions and our values, and that's what terrorism tries to do.
Okay, gentlemen, hang on. I want to ask that question. I want to go live now to Manitoba and listen into Premier Greg Selinger. He's holding a press conference right now. We'll come right back to that. Let's listen in. All right, we've lost the audio. This is Premier Greg Selinger. He is in Winnipeg. This is a press conference. Premier Selinger canceled a planned cabinet meeting for today. It was a no-show last night's Jewish Foundation of Manitoba's 50th anniversary event. He's got a lot of cabinet ministers speaking out concerning him, the Justice Minister, the Health Minister, the Minister of Jobs and the Economy. They've all spoken out saying that this guy may be a political liability going into the 2016 election. As soon as we get this audio, many have speculated that he might announce his resignation today. We've also heard sources saying he won't. Let's listen in. We've got the audio.
They need to put down roots and have a good life in Manitoba. And we do this all by listening carefully to what Manitobans say to us. And they have said to us, focus on our priorities. And they've said our priorities right now are steady growth and good jobs in the economy, with a priority on infrastructure at the municipal level, municipal infrastructure that protects us from floods, and you know how expensive that is and why we have to do that, and it's lots of work that has to go on there, and strategic infrastructure that builds the economy. And while you're doing that, they have said, make sure that there's opportunities for our young people. And as you know, I've been touring the province on the skills agenda. We've been talking to people about their ideas on that, letting them know what's out there, and we're continuing to make reforms in our educational institutions to ensure that we have the kinds of opportunities for young people where there are no wrong doors, that they can get a start in high school on a trade or a specialty career like cybersecurity, for example, at Sistar High School, and then be able to take that into employment or to further education as they go forward. And as you know, we've also reached out to First Nations communities and asking what their concerns are and how they can have those opportunities as well, because we see a sense of inclusiveness in this province. So that's what I've been focused on. That's what I continue to be focused on. And you know, folks, that there's been some folks that have recommended I take a serious look at my future role, and some of them are cabinet ministers. I've had a conversation with those folks today, and I've said that we have to focus our energy on the priorities of Manitobans. That's where we need to be putting our efforts as cabinet ministers, as caucus members. And the conversation has to focus on those priorities. And I've had that conversation with them and emphasized the need to do that as we go forward and continue to work together as a team in this province. And so all options are on the table as we go forward. All options in terms of people's commitment to wanting to work on that vision for Manitoba. But today I tell you that I'm committed to that vision and planning to move forward.
And
Thanks.
Swan said this morning that if you say the next election becomes a referendum on Greg Selinger, how do you respond to that, and does he stay in the cabinet?
Again, all options are on the table, and we've had that conversation. The referendum certainly is always on the government and the leader in the government and what policies they put forward and why they've done that. And as you know, we had a challenging choice to make. We were confronted by the flood of the century in 2011, and then again this year. We've seen even more challenges with respect to floods, and we had to make some choices to invest in those kinds of infrastructure.
The implication is that the anger is on you and that you can't get
Sure.
past that in time for the election.
Yeah,
You're
and,
listening to the Premier of Manitoba, Greg Selinger. Will he decide to step down? Answer, absolutely not. He said he's spoken to his cabinet colleagues who have suggested that it's time for him to step away as Premier. He said that's not going to happen. Now, what he's talking about here is the NDP's raising the provincial sales tax by 1% from 7 to 8%. At one point in the 2011 election campaign, Selinger was asked about, would you ever do that? And he said, it's, quote, ridiculous to think of that. Well, guess what? It wasn't ridiculous. He actually did it. And now his government has paid a very steep political price for that. He says he's needed the money to invest in infrastructure, especially to prevent floods. But he's paying a political price. The headline today, despite low polls, despite calls for resignation from cabinet colleague Greg Selinger, is going to fight on. All right, so that's the news out of Manitoba. I want to swing right back here to Parliament Hill, where I've got 3 MPs standing by to talk about the meeting today between, obviously, John Kerry, the Secretary of State from the U.S., and John Baird, our Foreign Affairs Minister, who will be on this program, Aaron O'Toole, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Paul Dewar, the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic, and Wayne Easter, the Liberal Public Safety critic. Thanks, gentlemen, for staying with us here. Mr. O'Toole, I heard from you before. Do you think what happened, the attack that killed Corporal Cirillo, was a terrorist act? You think it was. Let's go to Mr. Dewar. John Kerry and John Baird called this an act of terror, a terrorist act. So is the Prime Minister. In your view, Mr. Dewar, is the killing of Corporal Cirillo a terrorist act?
Well, you know, Evan, we need to see that video and we need to get the full reporting from police. Did it create terror and chaos in well, my hometown and the riding I represent? Absolutely it did. But, you know, how that's interpreted is important, because when you say, was this a terrorist attack? No, I just actually had a meeting with Minister Baird and Secretary of State Kerry. We actually had an hour together to talk about all the issues. You know, when you present that to someone like Secretary of State Kerry, he's going to, you know, hear what they're saying locally and the minister and say, well, yes, it is. What we need to be careful of, though, is when you say that, that implies, and I'm saying that, well, most people would hear, that this was an external kind of influence. We're not sure of that yet, and so that's where we have to be a little careful on what we mean by that. Did it create terror here in Ottawa and chaos? Yes, it did. But in terms of saying absolutely this was a terrorist attack, like most people understand, which means what? Usually that there was an external relationship with another group or something else. We just don't know that yet, so we have to be careful.
Okay, but hang in there, because I'm just trying to figure out how you define it, and
well,
it's
good
important.
Point.
One, we know the RCMP said, despite mental illness issues, which the RCMP spoke about, they said he was radicalized, he had some connections to some radicalized group, but if he wasn't killed, it's likely, according to people like Wesley Wark, he would have been tried under Canada's terror laws. So does that make it de facto an act of terror, a terrorist act, or is it important to make this distinction in the wake of the new laws coming down?
Well, I think it's important to make a distinction. It's important to have all the facts. That's all I'm saying of it. And we haven't got all the facts, and we haven't seen the video, and so let's also wait for that.
All right. Okay, so you won't call it a terrorist act yet. What about you, Mr. Easter?
Well, it was certainly an act of terror by a lone individual. If this was a planned terrorist attack, there would have been a planned target within the Parliament buildings, and much more dangerous if there was more than one with a plan of the targets they wanted to hit. Regardless of whether you want to call it a terrorist attack or not, it is a wake-up call in terms of the security of this Parliament and others across the country. But, Evan, I want to come back to one other point that John Kerry said, and I think it's an extremely important point. He indicated there needed to be tweaking between communications between CSIS and security agencies in the U.S. The CERC report of last week said there's a problem with communications within CSIS within Canada, between the regional divisions, between each other, and between headquarters. That's a serious issue that I hope CSIS is on today, because that's an important one that doesn't require legislation. It just requires resources and action from the authorities.
Let me just play you that clip as well. Let's show that clip that you're referring to.
We will continue to intensify our law enforcement, border protection, and intel sharing relationship and efforts to do that. And I'm confident that we will come up with some tweaks, some changes, some additions that will promote even greater security than we have today.
Mr. O'Toole, what tweaks and what's on the table?
Well, Evan, I think we have to watch where these threats emerge. You know, our government has tried to respond to keep public safety at the forefront, but also balancing, making sure that any intrusions on civil liberties are minimal. But if you look over the last 15 years, this homegrown terrorism, radicalization of young people has been a relatively recent phenomenon. We enacted laws to restrict or to make it a crime for somebody to travel abroad to meet with these groups, to be trained, to return to commit attacks here. Now it seems in some cases the radicalization is being done almost remotely through social media, and part of the most disturbing threat with ISIL is they're actually promoting through their social media channels radicalization and trying to entice young radicalized youth into committing attacks in their own country. So what sort of tools do law enforcement need to go after people that are clearly at a risk? And this is something that has to evolve because the threat is evolving.
What does it mean? What are you exactly, I mean, this is, the precision here is important because you've got free speech. You've got the RCMP just a week ago saying you can't arrest someone for thinking bad thoughts or sometimes for even posting, although there are laws about that. What exactly are you thinking the government can do to track and or charge people that you think are potentially threatening, but yet they haven't done anything yet?
Well, interesting, Evan, and I said this yesterday. I was scrummed on the way into caucus last Wednesday before the terrible attack on this very issue. And Canada, you know, we're not going to go to an area where we have thought police. It's about giving police the tools to investigate, to see who are the people that will take bad thoughts and move them into action. That's where I think Canadians want to make sure that law enforcement don't identify people with beef.
What does that mean? Boy, it's easy to say. What's bad thought? What does it mean investigate? What powers do you have to survey and investigate someone who has, quote, bad thought?
Well, this is what we have to provide the tools for. We have restricted the travel and training, the people going abroad to fight, people going abroad to be trained. What tools do they need now in terms of both resources for surveillance and, you know, what evidentiary burdens are required before they can detain someone? It's this fine line, and, you know, I think we'll have lessons learned from last week over the next few months that we've got to take to heart, because you can't move too quickly, but we've all seen with any of these type of terrorism attacks, if law enforcement moves too late,
right,
that's the risk. And so where's the balance, Evan? I think we're going to try and strike the right balance.
Well, all right, let me go to you, Paul Dewar, on this.
Yeah.
You were with John Kerry for a long time. Can you give us an outline of what his point is, not only on he clearly did link this attack to security measures and anti-terrorism. Was there also a link to the combat mission in Iraq?
We talked about Iraq, but more in a foreign affairs prism. What we talked about, though, in terms of our country and the United States is vis-a-vis this issue, is just simply what you had in this clip, and that is the coordination. Look, the government admitted, Minister Blaney in House of Commons yesterday admitted there was a lack of response from government. I agree with that, and I think most people do, and he said it, not me. And I think the point is what kind of response do we need? Some of us are saying, look, we think you have the tools right now. Perhaps you need to do two things. One is better coordination, and that includes with our friends south of the border. And secondly, giving the appropriate resources to the agencies that are going to be involved here. And that's something that's a really important point. And the oversight. And, you know, we've had this debate before around the oversight to CSIS, that it should be expanded. They've already asked for that, and there should be some civilian inputs there, because the balance, it shouldn't be between civil rights and security being separate. They should go hand in hand. We think he can do that by doing what I've just laid out. And all Secretary of State Kerry was saying is that coordination thing. He wasn't calling us to have stronger laws or more tools in the toolkit in terms of the oversight, or in terms of giving extended powers. And clearly he's not going to extend it.
Hang on, just slow down because there's a lot there. You're saying they need more resources, they need more oversight, but you don't think they need expanded powers?
Well, at this point, no. They've gotten to preventative arrest is a great example. They already have that, but we haven't seen that being used. And the government's saying, well, we need to have more. Now, the police is going to obviously say yes. We'll take that. What we have to do as legislators is get the fix right, and between civil liberties and security. And we think they can go hand in hand. And in this case, what we're saying is that give the resources to the people who can actually do that, because right now they're having to shift resources, for instance, just to make sure Parliament's secure. They're taking those resources away from other areas to provide us with that. We think that's the issue. Okay, so resource issues, not a powers issue. And of course, we remember back in, I think it was 2012, when the Senate repassed the Combating Terrorism Act back in 2012. All right, what about you? Well, let me get Wayne Easter real quick on that. Resources or power? What's your take on this?
There's actually probably both. Resources, and there may be some additional authorities in terms of protecting informants abroad. I won't deny that. But the fact of the matter, you have to ask, why are the current laws but not been utilized? On connections with terrorist organizations abroad, leaving or attempting to leave Canada to be involved in a terrorist act abroad, you can be convicted from 10 to 14 years. Why has that been utilized? We don't know. But more so on the kind of the lone act of terror individual within Canada and also terrorism, the INSETs, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Teams, which include local police, community police, RCMP, CSIS, our other counterparts across the border. Those are extremely important. They've been in place a long time. Are communications working effectively there? And are they working within the community to find these one-off individuals, which are the hardest ones to trace and detect and to monitor?
Okay, I got about 1 minute here. I just want to get you on this. John Kerry also was questioned about something retired U.S. General John Allen said recently, that ISIS needs to be fought online. But check out what John Kerry said the U.S. is prepared to do to counter ISIS propaganda online.
We will leave no effort untested with respect to our efforts to shut down the ability of these people to propagandize, to lie, to deceive.
All right, let me start with Aaron O'Toole. What exactly will the government do to fight ISIS online?
Well, I think that's something we have to work on with not just law enforcement, but with people from social services. I was talking to a social worker in my riding on the weekend, Evan, and there's a lot of similarities with some of the radicalized youth and the old gang recruitment, where they're finding people basically that are shut out and want a sense of belonging. And it seems like some of that can be found almost online for some of these people. And so what sort of presence with an alternate message to these people who are essentially looking to belong, like the old gangs that used to recruit at-risk kids? Can we take any of these methods that law enforcement are already using for some of their gang work to get that online, to make sure that there's an alternate message for people that might be just seeing this sort of hate-fueled propaganda?
Am I crazy to say that sounds like what your party criticized Justin Trudeau for talking about root causes? Isn't that exactly what root causes is all about?
No, Evan, the issue
I know
with
it's a political term, but it sounds to me that's exactly what you're talking about.
I think we need to make sure that any community that needs tools to make sure that anyone they feels at risk has them. After a horrific strike, whether it's Boston, the U.S. went through this in Boston where Mr. Trudeau made those comments before knowing anything about the attack. He started talking about the marginalization of the attackers. Our response here is we've got to give law enforcement the tools to prevent these attacks. That's what Canadians need. And if part of those tools are creating an alternative narrative online to counter some of this radical thought and really hate thought trying to
that's
radicalize
exactly
it,
what
that
he's
should
saying.
be part of it.
I'm not trying to defend Mr. Trudeau. I'm trying to say
true.
you're saying exactly what he's saying with different words.
What I'm saying, Evan, is it has to be part of any long-term solution, and we've already indicated that as a government. What the issue was with Mr. Trudeau was in minutes following an attack, the thought should go out to those affected and should go out to law enforcement dealing with it, not really trying to make excuses for the attackers minutes after the attack.
Okay. All right, I got a minute here, and I know Mr. Dewar, Mr. Easter want to jump in real quick, guys.
We have to do a lot more, and that's engaging with community. We have to, the first thing I did this past week was go talk to the people in our local mosque. We have to do outreach with people. I actually agree with Aaron on this, but I wish the government would be doing more to do that engagement. The UK's doing some of this. Denmark's doing some of this. The Americans are doing some of this. This has got to be strong engagement at the grassroots level, and the only way we're going to deal with this is if we invest in those areas.
Evan, I had a motion to put in place a subcommittee at the Public Safety Committee, Public Safety and National Security Committee to, in fact, look at this. Basically, what are the root causes? What is causing radicalization? What are the linkages? How do these people connect on the internet? Then how do they connect to terrorist organizations abroad? We needed to talk to people in mosques, to parents, etc., to individuals and friends of people who become radicalized to find out why does this happen in the first place. We have to get to that cause and undermine that cause to prevent this from happening.
All right, I got to leave it there, gents. Aaron O'Toole, Paul Dewar, Wayne Easter, I appreciate all three of you being on the program today, as always.
Thank you. Thank you.